Hello. I am Ken Wilson, and this talk is called Seven Quotations to Make You Think. First of all, to remind you who I am, I was in Romania quite often back in the early part of this century, but most of you will probably be too young to remember that. I'm the author of the Prospect series, which a lot of you used in schools between about 2000 and 2007. Just to say one thing here, Prospects was a 6-level course, and the super advanced level we wrote just for Romania. I'm absolutely serious about that. When we came to Romania to look at the advanced classes, we found that our advanced level was simply too easy for them. So we wrote a super advanced level. And Romania was the only country where the super advanced level was used. I'm also one of the authors of the Move Ahead series, which I think some of you may have used way back in the past. So my talk is called 7 Quotations to Make You Think. And what I've done is I've taken quotations from famous people to help us reflect on how we teach. The quotations themselves are not necessarily anything to do with education, but I've turned them into some thoughts on the way we teach. Here are 3 of the people who I will quote later on. You can probably work out who they are. Now, if this was a real talk, I mean, it is a real talk, but if it was a talk in a room with real people in front of me, I would say what I always say at this stage, which is, look, if I ask you any questions, shout out answers and really don't worry if your answer is right or wrong. And I think this is something I carry into my teaching. I think students get so anxious and nervous about saying a correct answer, giving a teacher a correct answer when she asks them a question. And sometimes they don't say it, even if they do know the right answer. But for me, it's less important if they know the right answer or the wrong answer, but just to shout things out because I really appreciate it. I admire students who have the courage to say something. And I admire teachers who are even more worried about making mistakes in a public place if you shout something else. And this is nothing to do with your English level. It's, do you know who these people are? If you do, great. If you don't, doesn't matter. So let's move on. Occasionally during my talk, you will see this frame, did you know? When I show you that frame, I will then remain silent and show you some information about the person I've just been speaking about. And you have to remember it. And if it was, if we were all together in the same room, I would test you on it at the end. That's terrible, a test in a talk. Okay, so we're going to talk about some famous people and what they said, and occasionally you will see this did you know sign after I've talked about the person, and there'll be some information about them. And I won't say anything, you just have to remember it. But first, and this is not one of my 10 quotations, this is a pre-quotation. I want you to read this quotation about children. Children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority, and show disrespect to their elders. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble their food, and tyrannize their teachers. Well, sounds like the children we have now, doesn't it? But how old do you think this quotation is? Any ideas? I'm sure some of you know it already. It is, of course, from this man, or this representation of a famous man. If you know who it is, shout at the screen or shout from where you are. It is, of course, Socrates. How long ago did Socrates live? 500 years, 1,000 years, 2,500 years ago. So we now know that children were a problem in those days. Now, for some of us, I think it's very good. I think children should contradict their parents. They should contradict their teachers, not tyrannize them, and they shouldn't show disrespect. But contradicting, arguing against what you hear is not disrespect. It's good. It's good for kids to do that, and you should allow it to happen in class. I love that quotation. Chatter before company. That's an interesting expression, using before as a preposition of place. Quite unusual, in fact, these days, quite rare. But there is one group of people who like to use this expression for some reason, and they are United States presidential candidates who will always say, ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you this evening. It's the Democratic nominee, blah, 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 blah. I stand before you this evening. But normally we don't use before as a preposition of place. Okay, now, Here's another wonderful quotation from Socrates. It's not one of my 7 quotations. This is a pre-quotation. But there's 2 quotations that are attributed to Socrates, which for me say so much about the educational process. This is the first one. Education is not the filling of a vessel, it's the kindling of a flame. In other words, you're just not there to push information into the head of a student long enough for that student to regurgitate the information in an examination. It's a different process. You should be lighting the interest, kindling, lighting the flame of their interest in the language. And another quotation from Socrates: I cannot teach anybody anything, I can only make them think. Socrates was famous for this. Socrates just put things out there for people to discuss and then created terrible, terrible arguments amongst them and got himself into trouble, as you probably know. But I think of all the people who I've been influenced by as an educator, Socrates with these 2 expressions is right up there. So, 10 quotations to make you think. First of all, here are the first 3 people that I'm going to quote from. Do you know who these 3 people are? They're all old white men with crazy white hair. I don't know where I got the idea to have old white men with crazy white hair. The man on the left, of course, shout out his name if you know it, is Albert Einstein. The man in the middle, do you know who that is? Shout out his name if you know it. His name is Mark Twain. And the man on the right, anybody know who that is? It is actually Samuel Johnson. So these are the first 3 people that I'm going to quote from. Old white men with white hair. Einstein. I wish Einstein had been my science teacher. He made science so exciting. He would say things like, an egg which boils in 4 minutes will boil in 3 minutes if the kitchen is moving fast enough. I have no idea what that means, but if my science teacher had said that kind of thing to me when I was at school, I would have enjoyed science a lot more. The quotation I want you to think about, this is now the first of my 7 quotations to make you think, is this one. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Now, I don't know why Einstein said this originally, but I know how I interpret it, and I interpret it like this. The knowledge of your students in the classroom is a kind of given. When you go into the classroom, you know who are the best students. I hate that expression, best students. We must never use it in front of the students. You know the students who are struggling, but also the students do too. When the students walk in, I walk in, I think, she's a better student than me. He's about the same as me. Okay, they know where they are in what we call the pecking order. But that pecking order is based on knowledge. It's based on their reaction to your way of teaching as well. My feeling is if we can find ways to access students' imagination, it might change the nature of the classroom. Now, whenever I talk about using imagination to teachers of English, they say, look, my students have a wonderful imagination in their own language. They're frustrated if I ask them to use their imagination in English. I completely understand that. You know, somebody with a lot of imagination, is very frustrating if you can't use your imagination in the new language, in the language that you're learning. But I think there are ways you can find activities which access a kind of small amount of somebody's imagination. I want to give you an idea. Here's a story. Okay. At the hospital near where I live, all the doctors are women, and all the nurses are men. Wow. When new patients arrive at the hospital, they always call the doctors nurses, which makes the doctors feel quite annoyed. And they also call the nurses doctors, which makes the nurses feel quite pleased. Following it so far? One day at the hospital, a patient, a man, approached the doctor. "Excuse me, nurse," said the patient, "when can I see the doctor?" "Listen," said the doctor, "I'm a doctor, and the man over there that you think is a doctor is actually a student nurse." "Oh, sorry," said the patient. "The last time I came to this hospital, that nurse said that you were a nurse." "Well, I'm not," said the doctor. "I'm a doctor, not a nurse." "Well, once again, sorry about that," said the patient. "By the way, what's your name?" "Nurse," said the doctor. "Dr. Nurse." Little joke. Now, This is a very simple story, the kind of story you see in an intermediate level English book, you know, bit of humor, bit of narrative, conversation. But let's go back to the beginning. I remember when I use this story with students, I say to the students, I'm going to ask you questions about this story, but the answers are not on the page. It's interesting because they go, and they start looking at the page in a bit of alarm. I say, no, I mean, for example, and I remember doing this with a class of students in Budapest, Hungary, your neighbors over there, okay? They were 16 years old, and you know Hungarians have this wonderful way of speaking very high and finishing very low. And so I said, as an example, at the hospital near where I live, where is the hospital? And one of the boys said, near where I live. I said, near where you live? He said, near where you live. No, it isn't near where I live. He said, I don't know. I said, well, I don't know. And he said, if you don't know, how can I know? Okay, look, let's start again. I don't know who wrote this story, okay? But let's assume they're from a British English-speaking place, okay? Because it's in English. So it could be anywhere, but in the English-speaking word, where is the hospital? And eventually somebody says, Oxford. I said, great, Oxford. And the rest of you go, how did she know that? I said, it's your story. This information is in your heads. I don't know what the answers are. This can be very confusing for a student to start with, but soon they get the idea. At the hospital near where I live, it's in Oxford. Is it an old hospital or a new hospital? Old hospital, says somebody. Good, how old is it? Okay, 5 years. No, look, they said it was an old hospital. And they start realizing they have to listen to each other and build up the story together. It's an old hospital, it's 100 years old. That means it was built in 1920. How many beds, how many floors, how many doctors, how many nurses? This information is not in the story. This information, as soon as the students start thinking about it, they can shout out a number. Okay, shouting out numbers is not great imagination, but then we can move on. What's the name of this patient? Smith, what's his first name? Joe Smith. What's wrong with him? Nothing too horrible. And we build up a picture. We build up a picture of the nurse as well. And then we say, and for your homework, go home and write the bigger story. So that for me is giving students a chance to use their imagination in a controlled fashion. I like it when activities do that. Use your imagination, but in a controlled fashion. I have a cup of tea here, so I'm going to drink some of it. Okay. Oh, did you know about Albert Einstein? So I'm going to just leave this and test you on it at the end. It's gone. I hope you're quick readers. Here's my second old white male with white hair. Interesting man, Mark Twain, not his real name, of course. And there's one quote, this is not the quotation I want you to go away with, but I just love this quotation from Mark Twain, who said once, when I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant, I could hardly stand to have him around. But when I reached 21, I was astonished by how much the old man had learned in 7 years. I think that says so much about relationships between teenage boys and their fathers. But this is the quotation I want you to think about. He once said, I never let my schooling interfere with my education. And again, I don't know what he meant when he said that, but I can feel Mark Twain, the characters he wrote about in his books were misfits. They were boys who didn't really fit into society. And I think he was probably the same. Of course, it wasn't his real name. His real name was Samuel Langhorne Clemens. Mark Twain, as you know, is what people shout on the Mississippi River. But I can somehow see this boy sitting in class and the teacher's saying something, and maybe he said, why? He asked a critical awareness question, okay? And they said, just shut up and listen. And he went, okay, whatever. And physically he remained in the classroom, but mentally he went somewhere else, okay? He did not like his schooling, so he educated himself somewhere else. And that's quite sad. And I think it's easy for me to say, just think about the way you teach sometimes. Sometimes, I remember very clearly when I was a full-time teacher, there were students who I thought, why are you being so difficult? Why don't you like what I'm doing? And stepping back from those moments now, I realized that I wasn't trying hard enough to reach that person. And again, it's easy to say this, and there are many people in the class for you to reach, but just sometimes think, if I just change slightly, will that student who seems so unhappy in my class find a way to feel more involved? That's what I understand the meaning for that quotation to be. Another did you know? So information coming up, I'll have some tea. Wow, I will ask you about that later on. Who is the third old white man with white hair? It is, of course, Samuel Johnson. Samuel Johnson, the man who wrote what we consider to be the first dictionary of the English language. He lived in the 18th century. He's the only reason I would like to have been alive in the 18th century. He was amazing. We have this wonderful expression, Samuel Johnson bestrode the London literary scene like a colossus. Bestrode, an unusual verb. It's the past tense of bestride. What does bestride mean? Like a colossus? Well, maybe some of you know what the Colossus of Rhodes looks like. Apparently in the city of Rhodes, or on the island of Rhodos in Greece, they say in the old days there was this massive, massive statue which boats had to sail through when they went in. So the Colossus, huge, and it bestrode the port of Rhodos, of Rhodes, okay? Anyway, that's what they said about him. He bestrode the London literary scene like a colossus. And he would go to coffee houses. In the 18th century, coffee was more important than tea in London. And there were some very nice coffee houses, and there were places where people would go and talk about politics, talk about literature. And one day he walked into a London coffee house and he said, I have in my hand a new glossary of the English language, and it is ridiculous. He opened it and he said, look at this definition, the definition of the word horse. The definition of the word horse in this glossary was an animal well known to man. An animal well known to man. That was the best the person who compiled this glossary of the English language could do in terms of defining a horse. And apparently Samuel Johnson said to the people, I'm going to write a dictionary of the English language. I think it will take me 7 years. 7 years. Well, this is what it looked like. There were 2 levels of this, and that's how big it is. It was quite an ambitious thing. It actually took him 31 years to compile the first dictionary of the English language. But back at the beginning, when he first walked into the coffee house, everybody said, you're mad. It's impossible to do. The language is too diverse. It's impossible to do a dictionary of the English language. To which he replied, nothing will ever be attempted if all possible objections must first be overcome. The reason I'm putting this here as a quotation for you to think about is that when you go to conferences like this, online or real, you see some ideas, you think, yeah, but not my class. Why? Why not try it? If somebody comes up with an idea at this conference, you think, that's a bit crazy in my class, try it. Don't try it once, try it twice, try it 3 times. And then if it doesn't work, fine. But always give a new idea a try. Because if you keep saying it won't work in my class, if you keep bringing up possible objections, you'll never try anything new. Good quotation from another old man with white hair. Okay, that's my last old man with white hair. I'm going to come up with one more man. He's much younger. He doesn't have white hair. You know who this man is? Of course, it's Mark Zuckerberg. And my quotation from Mark Zuckerberg, when somebody said to him, why do you think Facebook, he's of course the man who devised Facebook, why do you think Facebook is so successful? He said, people have a very basic desire to express who they are. Now, I've extended this quotation a little bit more to the following. I think people, your students, have a very basic desire to express who they are. what they want, what they think, and what they know. In other words, their identity, who they are, I'm Ken, I'm English, what they want, I'd like to visit China again one day, what they think, you don't want to know my opinions about Donald Trump, and what they know. I know about Donald Trump. Okay, identity, ambition, opinion, and knowledge. These are 4 basic things about expressing yourself. And all I suggest is that when you prepare your lessons, that you have that there in front of you. Whatever you're practicing, you look at the fantastic practice you're going to do of the present perfect tense using Simpson 4 or whatever. You've got this great lesson all sorted out with an idea for a grammar idea, some vocabulary, some skills work. And then step back and say, have I offered my students a chance to do at least one of these things? Talk about their identity, their ambition, their opinion, or their knowledge. Every lesson should give students, even from the very beginning, obviously from the very beginning, I'm Ken, I'm English, okay, identity. Every lesson should have an opportunity to do one of those things. If you've done this wonderful presentation of the present perfect tense using Simpson 4, but there's none of those things, then what's the point? What is the point of the lesson? Oh, did you know? I'll have another cup of tea while you look at this information about Mark Zuckerberg. It's gone. Remember that, because I'm going to test you at the end. And now, let's get rid of all these awful men and find quotations from these 3 women. Who are these 3 women? Shout their names at the screen. Everybody knows that's Audrey Hepburn. I'm sure some of you think that's Greta Garbo. It's actually a woman called Tallulah Bankhead. Never heard of her? Google her later. Tallulah Bankhead. And this is not, as many people seem to think, Oprah Winfrey. It is, of course, Maya Angelou. So these are the 3 women who are going to provide quotations for me today. Start with Audrey Hepburn, one of the world's most famous Belgians. She was born in Belgium, as probably you know. She lived in the main part of the 20th century. And a quotation I found from her, which I really like, and it appeals to me very much, is this. I love people who make me laugh. I honestly think it's the thing I like most, to laugh. It cures a multitude of ills. It's probably the most important thing in a person. The last thing I want to suggest to you as a teacher is that you walk into a classroom and you start telling jokes. However, I think it's nice to find activities that make people laugh, and I'm going to show you one now. It's an activity I do called also ABC. And this is how it works. You have to demonstrate it with one student to start with. What we're going to do, you say to your partner, just to start with, the student will go off and have another partner eventually. I'm going to say something nice to you, an adjective beginning with the letter A. I'm going to say, you're so, anybody come up with a nice word? Artistic, good. You're so artistic. And you're going to say, really? And I say, yes. Okay, and you say, thank you. And I say, you're welcome. Now it's your turn to say something nice to me, beginning with B. You're so, okay, so the student goes, you're so brilliant. So that's, we have our formula there, okay? Very simple, okay? And then they get into pairs and they face each other and they go through the entire alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, saying nice words to each other. And you cannot imagine the amount of laughter that this activity causes. And make sure that they go the really, fall, rise, yes, rise, fall, okay? So, and just 1 or 2 notes about how to deal with it. For example, okay, so now it's A's turn to say something beginning with C about me. You're so creative. Really? Yes, thank you. Right, okay. D. I can't think of anything beginning with D. Can you? No. Forget it. Move on to the next one. You're so energetic. Okay. So if there's a letter they can't do, that's fine. Just move on. If the one person can't, but the first person can, go back to them. And of course, you won't get all the way through the alphabet. I mean, let them go on till about J or K and then stop the activity. But the nice thing about this is, for some reason, it makes people feel fantastic about themselves. They've been hearing all this stuff, which probably isn't true, but it feels good to have somebody say you're artistic, you're creative, you're energetic, you're fantastic, okay? And at the end, you sit down and say, did you hear any words that you didn't know? Because sometimes people will say, you're daring. What does that mean? And they'll translate it for each other. They'll all speak the same language. So you sit around and say, did you hear any new words yet? Daring. Oh, what does that mean? Oh, okay. And if it's right, leave it. If it's not right, maybe just check on it. But it doesn't matter if occasionally words come up that the students get the meaning slightly wrong. It's a wonderful activity. It makes people laugh. Laughter is a good thing in the classroom, although the teachers teaching mathematics next door might not agree. That's one of the activities from my book, Drama Improvisation. There's about 70 activities in there, but the bad news is you can't buy this book, it's out of print. Okay, but I put together, if you ever get a chance to see this book somewhere, there's lots of nice drama activities, fun activities in there. Now then, Tallulah Bankhead. Has anybody ever heard of Tallulah Bankhead? Really, you haven't heard of Tallulah Bankhead? Well, that's extraordinary, because in the old days, she was top of the bill. Look at this. This is a film called Faithless. I think it was made in about 1929. And Robert Montgomery, big Hollywood star, but he is second on the bill below Tallulah Bankhead. She was a big star. She was also big trouble for the studios. In fact, this quotation, this is not the quotation I want you to remember. She once said, cocaine isn't habit forming. I should know, I've been using it for years. But the quote I want you to remember of hers, I really, really like, is this one. If I had to live my life again, I'd make the same mistakes, only sooner. I'm here to talk about mistakes. I've already mentioned this, okay? I love it when students make mistakes. Students make mistakes for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes you can say, that's a fantastic answer. It's wrong, but let me tell you, that's a very, very clever wrong answer. If you can big up, if you can make it really important, how nice it is to come up with an answer which isn't right, but it was such a clever way to try and get the answer, to make students realize, oh, he doesn't mind that I've been trying to get this answer and not quite getting there, okay. I want to tell you something. Then if you don't think that's a very a nice quotation to have, then more is the same from this man who I'd never heard of before, Samuel Smiles, an author and reformer, and he said something similar. He who never made a mistake never made a discovery. Making mistakes is crucial to learning anything, any subject whatsoever, and particularly languages. And if you look at a student as if you've had an electric shock every time they forget to put an S on the third person singular, for goodness sake, who cares? Who cares about getting the S right every time? Trying to say something, give students a chance to say something. I want to tell you about this boy who is my grandson. Now, he's 12 years old now, so it's a long time ago when he was about 5 or 6 years old. And he was showing me how to use my own mobile phone, how to get this effect on it. But he's half Irish. His father is Irish. His mother is my daughter, and his father is her Irish husband. He goes to Ireland a lot, and he's got the Irish ability to tell stories. And I said to him one day, what did you do in Ireland? And he gave me the most wonderful answer, which I immediately made a note of. He said, I go to Nevy's house. Nevy is his cousin. And I meet her friend and I speak to her. Look at that. He has, in one sentence, given examples of all the 3 endings of regular past tense verbs. Goed, meted, speakt. The only problem is the verbs he's chosen are not regular verbs. Okay. And I remember we were sitting there and his father, his Irish father, said, it's not gold, it's went. He didn't like it. And Senan looked at him and said, I'll worry about that another time. And that, if we can instill that kind of attitude in our students, I'll try and tell you what I want to tell you, and then we'll work out if it was right at the end. Don't stop your students every second when they make a mistake. Let them try and express themselves in any way they can, roundabout ways, using the wrong forms, okay? You can correct them afterwards, but don't correct them while they're doing it. And here are 2 more of my grandchildren. That's Sadie on the left and Morris on the right. And Morris, he invented a word one day. I was helping him get dressed and he had a pullover and he was having a problem with his pullover. And he said to me, can you uninside out it for me? Can you uninside out it for me? It's a natural thing to do for children when they're learning their own language. And it should be equally natural for students who are going to English via their own language. They might try and invent a word that they think might be similar to their own language. And you can see what they're doing. If you speak the same language as them, you can see what they're doing, okay? And it's such a nice thing to do. Can you uninside out it for me? Enjoy. Don't encourage mistakes, but enjoy mistakes and tell people, that's a fantastic mistake. That's so clever. I see what you did there. That's a very clever way to try and solve the problem. I make a big noise about this because I think it's really important. The things that I see when I observe classes that worry me most are when teachers go, no, and they look like, they look like I've had an electric shock just because somebody made a mistake. The wonderful Maya Angelou, okay, a writer, she died about 15 years ago now. Oh, it says 2104, it shouldn't say 2104, it should say 2014. Sorry, I didn't notice that. It's not 2104, it's 2014. She died 6 years ago. And she once said, I've learned that people may forget what you said, they may forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. I think you should think about this as a teacher. The atmosphere you create in the classroom stays with students a lot, okay? It stays with students a lot. I love this quotation, and you should think about it a lot. I want to just tell you a quick story about myself. I come from a town in the north of England, a city in the north of England, which is famous, was made famous by this painter. You might not know who he is, but he's quite famous in England. The city is called Salford, and the painter is called L.S. Lowry. That's a self-portrait by L.S. Lowry. And he was from my town, or he was born near my town, grew up in Salford. And he was worried about the effects of industrialization, how these factories were turning people into machines. And so all his paintings, the people are just kind of stick figures, and the buildings are powerful and monstrous. He was very much against the Industrial Revolution, dehumanizing people. That's where I was born. I'm very proud to be from there. I went to a grammar school, and sorry, let me just look at that picture again. That's me at a grammar school. I don't really approve of grammar schools, of selective schools anymore, but I went there, and that's, I enjoyed the education I had there. Now, this is a picture of a lot of the teachers who were my teachers, but in the middle, and I want to talk about that man in a minute, that's Mr. Nutter. What a wonderful name for a teacher, Mr. Nutter. But this person at the front was probably the most famous old boy of our school. He's actually the actor Albert Finney, who you might have seen in films. And this photograph was taken when Albert, who was already getting quite famous from his stage and screen performances, went back to the school. Albert Finney was about 12 years older than me, so I wasn't at school with him. But all of these teachers here, every single one of them, was still a teacher by the time I got there. I had all of those teachers, and I liked pretty much all of them. But the one I have pointed out, Mo, is, for me, Mr. Nutter, we called him Mo, was the most important teacher in my life. Now, the school, as a grammar school, closed in 1975, which is 45 years ago. 45 years ago. But we still have an old boys' dinner, a dinner for surviving pupils of Salford Grammar School. And I can tell you, some of the boys are very old indeed at these dinners. I made a speech there about 5 years ago now. And the oldest person in the group we worked at was 92 years old. And I told them, if I'm going to make a speech, I'm going to talk about teachers. And I said, there are three kinds of teachers. There are teachers who inspire you, who you look back and you realize they made a difference to your life. I want to talk about Mr. Nutter. I mentioned his name, and the place erupted in applause. I wasn't expecting that. But I want you to think about that as a teacher now. I want you to imagine your students meeting each other 50 years from now and mentioning your name and going, oh, wasn't she wonderful? That's quite a special part of being a teacher. It doesn't happen to dentists, okay? I said the second kind of teacher is the teacher who frightens you. Now, in those days, they could hit us with a piece of wood. The man I'm thinking of was not in that group there, thankfully. Otherwise, I'd have to say who he was. But when I mentioned his name, the place just was, they almost started booing. And the third kind of teacher are the ones you don't really remember. Do you remember Mr. Davis? No. Okay. So 3 kinds of teachers. Which one do you want to be? The one that people remember you in 50 years' time? I hope you do. I want to show you another picture now. Look at this extraordinary picture. What on earth is happening there? Look at this one. I'll explain. The 2 women there were at art school together. The woman on the right of the picture is an artist, and she works for a publisher in Vietnam that I am a series editor on the book that she works on. And she sent me this photograph because they had a 20-year reunion from the time they left art school. So she and her colleague met together after 20 years, and they brought pictures of their favorite teachers from 20 years ago. Here's another one. Okay, these were all art students together 20 years ago, and these were the teachers that they remembered, and they brought the pictures with them to the reunion. Isn't that lovely? Being remembered that way by your students. So that was 10 quotations to make you think. I'm going to give you one extra. I'm going to show you these 2 people. I don't think they need to be introduced. It is, of course, Barack Obama and his wife, Michelle. Now, I don't know if you know anything about their relationship and how they met. Barack Obama, you probably know this already, that he went to work in a law firm in Chicago, and Michelle was already working there, and she was his mentor. She showed him around the place, and he was very attracted to Michelle from the minute he met her. And he said, "Can I take you out?" And she went, "I'm your mentor. You know, I'm not allowed." You know, he said, "You're showing me how to use the photocopier. This is state secrets." Eventually, she agreed to go out, and they went to this Italian restaurant, Carnivale, in Chicago. They went there, had their first meal. And 25 years later, when he was president, he said to Michelle, "Let's go back to Carnivale for a reunion of 25 years since we met." And so, of course, they went for a nice, quiet dinner with about 127 security men around the place. And they were sitting at the table, and the manager of the restaurant came up and said, "Mr. President, Mrs. Obama, I hope you're enjoying yourself." And they said, "Yeah, thank you, it's really good." He said, "Mrs. Obama, Michelle, maybe you don't remember me, but I took you to the high school prom when we were 17. High school prom, big, very, as you may know, very important in high school." And Michelle said, "Oh my God, yes." And he said, "But Mr. President, may I say, thank you. You've made a great choice of wife, and I hope you have a nice evening." And he went away very quietly. And Barack said, "Wow, imagine if you'd married him, you'd be the owner of this really excellent restaurant." And what do you think Michelle replied? "No, if I'd married him, he would be president of the United States." Now, I'm just giving you that quotation. It's got no other value except to think about ambition. I miss those people like mad at the moment with the crazy things that happen in the United States. So, back to did you know about those first 3 people? Can you remember, what did I say about Albert Einstein? Do you remember what I wrote? Can you remember? That the nurse who was with him at the time he died didn't speak German, and so couldn't remember what he said. And he said, "Ach, ich muss etwas sagen." She said, "Sorry, mate, I don't speak German. Je ne parle pas allemand, je parle seulement français." Okay, and what about him? Wow, that he decided to do something different age 25. And the first year he learned Chinese, which apparently he speaks, he's got a Chinese wife now, I think. And the second year he learned to kill his own food. And finally, this wonderful one about Mark Twain. He was born during a visit by Halley's Comet. And during his life, he often predicted he would go out with it. And he died the day after the next appearance of the comet in 1913. Wow, bit of extraordinary history there. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much for joining me today. If you want to read any of the stuff I write on my blog, I don't blog very often these days, but I do put up materials for people to use, including some materials from my drama book, absolutely free and available online. Also, I put up there a lot of songs that I've written, English language teaching songs to download with word lists and a teaching idea. If you want to follow me on Facebook, that's the way you can find me, because a lot of people call Ken Wilson on Facebook. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And that's all for now. So thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed the talk.